I'm Natalie, 29 female. I work as an architectural drafter, a job where I spend my days drawing precise lines that define spaces, walls, doorways, property limits. For the past 7 years, every line I drew for a client was a line I dreamed of drawing for myself. I live in a city where the cost of living feels like a vertical climb up a cliff face, and the idea of owning property felt less like a goal and more like a fantasy. But I was disciplined. I lived in a tiny, overpriced apartment with paper-thin walls, drove a 10-year-old car, and became a master of budget spreadsheets and home-cooked meals. Every spare dollar went into an account I labeled 4 walls and a door. This wasn't just about real estate. It was about sovereignty. It was about having a single door in the entire world that no one could walk through without my permission. After years of saving, navigating a brutal market, and endless paperwork that made my head spin, I finally did it. I bought a small, 2-bedroom bungalow on a quiet, tree-lined street. It wasn't grand, but it was mine. The mortgage was terrifying, the responsibility was immense, but the feeling of holding that key for the first time was a kind of euphoria I'd never known. It was the key to my future, to my privacy, to my adult life, finally and truly beginning. My parents, Eleanor and David, were, on the surface, thrilled for me. My mother, a former office manager who ran our family life with the same meticulous and often intrusive efficiency she ran her workplace, immediately started a group chat titled Natalie's New Nest, to provide unsolicited advice on everything from curtain colors to property taxes. My father, a retired sales director with a charm that could disarm a bomb, called me his little real estate mogul, and patted me on the back with a proud smile. But their support always came with strings, invisible threads of expectation and control that I'd been trying to untangle my whole life. During the house hunting process, they'd insisted on coming to every viewing, offering loud critiques in front of the real estate agents. When I finally chose my bungalow, my mother sighed and said, "Well, it's a bit small, but I suppose we can make it work." That single word was a tiny red flag, one I chose to ignore in the excitement of the moment. The first few weeks were pure bliss. I painted the walls a calm shade of sage green, a color my mother had called drab. I bought a deep, comfortable sofa she deemed impractical. I spent entire weekends in silence, reading a book in a sunbeam, with no one to ask what I was doing or when I'd be finished. It was a quiet, profound peace. This house was my sanctuary, the physical manifestation of the boundaries I'd been desperately trying to build for years. I was finally in a space where I was in complete control, or so I thought. The story I'm about to tell you is about how that sanctuary was breached, not by a stranger, but by the 2 people who should have been its most dedicated guardians. It's about a spare key, a shocking statement, and the moment I realized that sometimes the people you love most are the ones you need to build the highest walls against. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. The job of an architectural drafter is one of details. You learn very quickly that a line drawn a millimeter off on a blueprint can result in a wall being built a foot in the wrong direction on a construction site. You learn about load-bearing walls, property easements, and the unyielding importance of a solid foundation. My entire professional life revolved around creating clear, unbreachable boundaries that dictate how a space is used. It was a skill I desperately wished I could apply to my personal life with the same success. For as long as I could remember, my parents, Eleanor and David, operated under the assumption that their lives and mine were a single, shared entity. My privacy was a suggestion, my personal choices were topics for committee review, and my boundaries were seen as temporary fences they could simply step over whenever it was convenient. My mother, Eleanor, was the architect of this family policy. Having managed an office of 50 people for 3 decades, she saw everyone, especially her own children, as projects to be managed. She was organized, efficient, and pathologically helpful. Her help, however, was rarely requested. It was a service she provided, like a subscription I never signed up for. When I was in college, she called my dormitory's front desk to ask for my class schedule because she had a feeling I was skipping my 8 a.m. history lecture. I wasn't, but the embarrassment was searing. When I moved into my first apartment, I came home from work one day to find she had rearranged my entire kitchen based on tea she called a more logical workflow. My pots and pans were in a different cupboard, my spices were alphabetized, and my sense of personal space was completely violated. I tried to protest, but she just smiled, patted my cheek, and said, "Don't be silly, dear. A mother knows best." My father, David, was the charming enabler. Where my mother was direct and managerial, my father was smooth and persuasive. He was the king of why make a fuss? And your mother only means well. He would back her plays with a smile and a shrug, making me feel like I was the unreasonable one for wanting something as simple as the right to decide where my own spatulas should live. He saw her intrusions as acts of love, and my desire for independence as a youthful quirk I would eventually outgrow. Together, they formed a perfect, boundary-eroding team. My older brother, Ben, had escaped the brunt of it by moving 8 hours away for a software engineering job right after college. His physical distance created a natural barrier they couldn't easily cross. During one of our rare, long phone calls, shortly after I closed on my house, he congratulated me with a mix of genuine pride and cautious warning. "This is awesome, Nat. Seriously. But you know how they are," he'd said. "You're going to have to manage their expectations. Don't let them turn your new house into their summer cottage." I laughed it off at the time, confident that a mortgage and a property deed were the ultimate statements of independence. I was wrong. My friend Chloe, an HR manager who spent her days navigating complex workplace disputes, was my rock during this period. The night I got my keys, she came over with a bottle of champagne and 2 glasses. We sat on the floor of the empty living room, the echo of our voices bouncing off the bare walls. "To Natalie," she toasted, her voice warm, "the undisputed queen of her own castle. May her reign be long and her visitors be by invitation only." We both clinked our glasses, laughing. Chloe understood. She'd witnessed my mother's tactics firsthand more than once. She'd been there when my mom showed up at my apartment an hour before a date I was nervous about, insisting on inspecting my outfit and offering unsolicited commentary. Chloe had gently but firmly ushered her out, an act of friendship for which I was eternally grateful. "Seriously, though," Chloe said, her expression turning more serious as we sipped the champagne. "You need to set the ground rules with them from day one. This is your home, not a family annex. Don't give them a key." "God, no," I replied, almost horrified at the thought. "I wouldn't even consider it. The whole point of this place is to have a place that's just mine." The thought was so absurd it was laughable. Why would I spend 7 years of my life sacrificing and saving for a door only to hand over the key? In those first few weeks, I leaned into the solitude. I unpacked my boxes slowly, deliberately placing each item, creating a home that was a reflection of me and no one else. I bought a ridiculously expensive coffee machine my father would call frivolous. I hung strange, abstract art my mother would find confusing. I planted a small herb garden in the backyard, even though I knew nothing about gardening. Each small act was a declaration of self. This house was my masterpiece, the blueprint of my own life finally taking shape. I felt safe. I felt secure. I would come home from work, pull into my own driveway, and walk through my own front door, and a wave of calm would wash over me. It was the feeling of a drawbridge being pulled up. I was in my fortress. No one could get in unless I let them. The sense of security was absolute. The foundation felt solid, and I believed, with every fiber of my being, that the walls I had so carefully built were impenetrable. It was a Tuesday in late autumn. The air had a crisp chill to it, and the leaves on the trees lining my street had turned to brilliant shades of gold and crimson. I was driving home from work, feeling that familiar sense of contentment bubble up inside me. It had been a long day of tedious revisions on a set of blueprints for a new commercial building, and I was mentally exhausted. The thought of my quiet living room, a cup of hot tea, and the new book waiting on my nightstand was the only thing pulling me forward. As I turned onto my street, everything looked perfect. The setting sun cast a warm, orange glow on the houses. Kids were riding their bikes on the sidewalk. It was the picture of peaceful, suburban life I had always dreamed of. But as I pulled into my driveway, a small, jarring detail pricked at my tired brain. A light was on in my living room. I froze, my hand on the gearshift. I distinctly remembered turning everything off before I left that morning. I was meticulous about it, a habit ingrained from years of living in apartments with high electricity bills. A flicker of fear went through me. Had I been robbed? Bed, was someone in my house? My heart started to beat a little faster. I took a deep breath, trying to be rational. Maybe I'd just forgotten. Maybe I was so tired this morning that I'd left the lamp on by the sofa. It was possible. Trying to shake off the unease, I grabbed my bag, got out of the car, and walked up the short path to my front door. I fumbled for my keys, my fingers feeling clumsy and cold. As I slid my key into the lock, I noticed the door was already unlocked. The deadbolt wasn't thrown. Now, alarm bells were clanging in my head. I never, ever left my door unlocked. I pushed the door open slowly, my whole body tense. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding small and uncertain in the sudden silence. And then I saw them. My parents, Alina and David, were sitting on my brand new sofa as if they owned the place. My mother was knitting something gray and lumpy, and my father was flipping through one of my magazines. The television was on, tuned to the evening news. 2 half-empty teacups sat on my coffee table. They looked up as I entered, their expressions not of surprise or apology, but of casual expectation, as if they had been waiting for me to get home from school. "Oh, there you are, dear," my mother said, not even pausing her knitting. "We were starting to wonder when you'd get here. Traffic was bad, I suppose?" My father smiled his easy, charming smile. "Hi, sweetie. We didn't want to bother you at work, so we thought we'd just pop over and get dinner started. Your mother brought that chicken casserole you love." For a moment, I was too stunned to speak. My mind was racing, trying to process the scene. The fear of a break-in was replaced by a tidal wave of a different emotion, a cold, sharp, penetrating anger. They were in my house, uninvited, unannounced. They had let themselves in and made themselves at home in my sanctuary. All the peace and security I had felt just moments before evaporated, replaced by the suffocating feeling of being invaded. I closed the door behind me, the click sounding unnaturally loud. I kept my voice steady, betraying none of the fury churning in my gut. "How?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. "Did you get in?" My father shifted uncomfortably, glancing at my mother. It was Alina who answered. She finally put down her knitting and reached into the pocket of her cardigan. She pulled out a shiny, brand new key, a perfect copy of the one on my own key ring, and held it up, dangling it from her fingers as if it were a charming little trinket. "Don't be so dramatic, Natalie," she said with a dismissive wave of her hand. "We had a spare made for emergencies." I stared at the key, then back at her face. My mind was blank with disbelief. I never gave them a key. I never authorized a copy. The implications of what she was saying, of what they had done, crashed down on me. She saw the look on my face, the dawning horror and indignation, and she preemptively tried to shut it down with her signature move, trivializing my feelings. She let out a small, patronizing laugh. "Honestly, it's not a big deal. You have your house, but we are still a family. Now it's family property, so let's not make a big deal out of it." Family property. The words hung in the air, thick and poisonous. My house, my dream, my 7 years of sacrifice, reduced to a communal asset. The fortress I had so carefully built had been breached from the inside by a secret key and a toxic definition of family. In that moment, something inside me shifted. The part of me that had always backed down, that had always allowed myself to be placated by "we only mean well," simply vanished. It was replaced by a cold, hard resolve. I stood there for a beat, letting the silence stretch. Then a slow, polite smile spread across my face. I walked past them, not saying a word, and pulled the front door wide open. The cool evening air rushed in. I turned back to look at them, my smile never wavering, and in the calmest voice I could muster, I replied, "I'm so glad you could visit. Now, let's walk through how guests are supposed to leave, so we can practice for next time." The effect of my words was instantaneous and profound. My mother's jaw, which had been set in a look of smug maternal authority, dropped. The knitting needles in her lap clattered together. My father, who had been trying to look nonchalant, froze with a magazine held halfway up to his face. The charming, easygoing mask fell away, revealing a man utterly unprepared for a change in the script. The air in the room crackled with attention, so thick I could feel it on my skin. Elena recovered first. Her shock morphed into indignation, a flush creeping up her neck. "Well, I never," she sputtered, her voice rising in pitch. "What kind of way is that to talk to your mother? We came here to help you, to bring you a nice dinner." My dinner was going to be a sandwich, which I was perfectly capable of making myself, I said, my voice still unnerving. Lie calm, my polite smile remained fixed in place. But my plans for the evening definitely did not include uninvited guests who let themselves into my home like a pair of common burglars. The word burglars landed like a slap. My father flinched. "Now, Natalie, that's not fair," he started, his peacemaker instincts kicking in. "We're your parents." "My parents are welcome here when they are invited," I retorted, my gaze unwavering. "People who use a secret, unauthorized key to enter my home are intruders. Now, as I said, the door is open. It's time to leave." For a terrifying second, I thought my mother was going to refuse. I saw a stubborn, defiant look in her eyes, the look she got whenever she was challenged. But something in my stance, in the cold finality of my tone, must have told her I was not backing down. This wasn't the old Natalie she could steamroll with a bit of guilt and a dismissive comment. Slowly, resentfully, she began to gather her things. She shoved her knitting into her bag with jerky, angry movements. My father, looking deeply uncomfortable, placed the magazine back on the coffee table, avoiding my eyes. They moved towards the door in a cloud of furious silence. As my mother passed me, she paused and hissed, "You are a deeply ungrateful young woman." I didn't respond. I just held the door open wider. I watched them walk down the path to their car, my mother's back ramrod straight with fury. I waited until their car had pulled away from the curb and its red taillights had disappeared around the corner before I closed the door. I leaned back against it, the wood cool against my back, and finally let out the breath I felt like I had been holding for my entire adult life. Then I did the one thing I could think to do. I locked the deadbolt. The sound of the bolt sliding home was satisfying, but it didn't erase the sick, violated feeling in the pit of my stomach. The silence in the house was no longer peaceful, it was eerie. Their presence lingered like a bad smell. The teacups on the coffee table, the casserole on my kitchen counter, it all felt like a contamination of my safe space. My hands were shaking. I pulled out my phone and dialed Chloe. She picked up on the second ring. "Hey, what's up?" she asked cheerfully. My voice came out as a choked whisper. "They were in my house, Chloe, they were just here." "Whoa, slow down. Who was in your house?" she asked, her tone immediately shifting to one of concern. I sank down onto the floor, my back still against the door, and told her everything. The light in the window, the unlocked door, finding them on my couch. I told her about the key and my mother's chilling declaration that my home was family property. When I finished, there was a moment of silence on the other end of the line. Then Chloe said, in a voice dripping with contempt, "Oh, Elena, that is a whole new level of audacity." "I don't even understand," I said, my voice trembling with a mixture of rage and hurt. "How could they think that was okay?" "Because they've always thought it was okay," Chloe said, her charm manager brain kicking into gear. "This isn't new behavior, Nat. This is just an escalation. They've been testing your boundaries for years, and every time you let a small thing slide, you taught them the boundary wasn't real. This is just the ultimate test." As she spoke, it was like a dam breaking in my mind. A flood of memories, a lifetime of smaller invasions I had brushed off or ignored, came rushing back. I remembered being 15 and finding my mother reading my diary. When I confronted her, she'd said, "A good mother needs to know what's on her child's mind. It's for your own protection." I remembered being in college and my father calling my part-time job at a bookstore to ask my manager how many hours I was working, worried I was overdoing it. I remembered the countless times they had dropped by my old apartment unannounced, always with a flimsy excuse, always expecting to be let in immediately. Each incident on its own had seemed like a minor annoyance, a symptom of overprotective parents. But now, seen through the lens of what had just happened, I could see the pattern. It wasn't about protection or helpfulness. It was about control. It was about their inability to see me as a separate, autonomous person. Buying the house wasn't a declaration of my independence to them. It was an expansion of their territory. "The family property comment?" I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. She meant it. She genuinely believes she has a right to this place. "Of course she does," Chloe affirmed. "In her mind, you're a subsidiary of the family corporation and she's the CEO. Your assets are her assets. That key is her company access card." The corporate analogy was so stark, so clinical, and so horrifyingly accurate. My family wasn't a unit built on love and respect. It was a hierarchy built on access and control. "So what do I do?" I asked, feeling overwhelmed. "First," Chloe said, her voice firm and resolute, "you eat that casserole, don't let it win. Second, tomorrow morning you call a locksmith. And third, you and I are going to figure out how they got that key in the first place." Her practical, step-by-step plan was exactly what I needed. It cut through the emotional fog and gave me a path forward. The anger was still there, burning hot and low, but now it had a purpose. This wasn't just about one evening. This was about reclaiming my entire life. The next morning, I woke up feeling hungover, though I hadn't had a drop of alcohol. The anger from the night before had settled into a cold, hard knot in my stomach. The first thing I did, before even making coffee, was take the casserole my mother had left and dump the entire thing into the trash. It was a petty act, but it felt like a necessary exorcism. As I watched the cheesy, congealed mess slide into the bin, I felt a small bit of my power return. My next call was to a locksmith. I explained that I'd just moved into a new property and wanted all the external locks changed for security reasons. I didn't elaborate. The man on the phone was professional and scheduled an appointment for the following afternoon. Step 1 was in motion. Now for the harder part, the investigation. Where did the key come from? As Chloe had pointed out, they couldn't have just willed it into existence. Someone, somewhere, had given them access. My mind immediately created a short list of possibilities. There was the real estate agent who had managed the keys during the sale. There were the sellers, but I couldn't imagine any reason they would have given a key to the parents of the buyer. Then there were the contractors. I'd hired a painter to repaint the interior before I moved in and an electrician to update a few outlets. I had been at work most of the time they were there. I tried to recall the timeline. I had managed the contractors myself, meeting them in the mornings to let them in. But there was one day, one afternoon, that I couldn't be there to lock up. A memory surfaced, hazy at first, then sharpening into painful focus. It was the painter. He had needed an extra day to finish up some trim work. I had a crucial deadline at my own job and couldn't leave. I'd been stressing about it on the phone with my dad the night before. "Don't you worry about a thing, sweetie," he had said in his smooth, reassuring voice. "I've got nothing on my calendar tomorrow. I'll pop over and let the painter in and lock up for you when he's done. Happy to help." At the time, I'd been flooded with relief and gratitude. It had seemed like such a kind, fatherly gesture. Now, it felt sinister. The kindness was a Trojan horse, and I had willingly opened the gates, but I needed confirmation. Accusing my father based on a hunch felt wrong, even after what they'd done. I needed more than a suspicion. I needed a witness. That's when I thought of my brother, Ben. He was the only other person who understood the family dynamics, even from a distance. He was logical, analytical, and less likely to get bogged down in the emotional drama. I hesitated before calling him. Part of me was worried he would tell me I was overreacting, that I should just let it go. But the need to know, to understand the depth of the deception, was stronger than my apprehension. I dialed his number. "Hey, Nat," he answered, sounding distracted. I could hear the faint clicking of a keyboard in the background. "What's up?" I took a deep breath and laid it all out for him. I told him about coming home to find them on my couch, about the key, and about Mom's family property line. I was careful to keep my tone factual and calm, presenting it like a problem to be solved rather than a dramatic family crisis. I knew that was the best way to get through to him. When I finished, he was silent for a long moment. The keyboard clicking had stopped. "A spare key," he said finally, his voice flat. "She did the same thing to me." I was stunned. "What are you talking about?" "Last year, when they visited me for Thanksgiving," he explained. Mom said she was worried about me losing my keys and wanted a spare to keep at her house, just in case. I thought it was weird, but I was busy with work, and it was just easier to say yes than to argue about it. I went to a hardware store and got a copy made for her. I never really thought about it again. It's not like they can just pop over here. A chill went down my spine. This wasn't a one-time, impulsive act against me. This was a pattern. This was my mother's standard operating procedure for maintaining access to her children's lives. She saw spare keys as her right, a maternal privilege. "Ben," I said slowly, "I didn't give them a key. I would never have done that. I think they had one made without telling me." Then I told him my suspicion about our father letting the painter in. Ben let out a long sigh. "Yeah," he said, and the resignati on in his voice told me everything. "Yeah, that makes sense. Now that you mention it, I remember Dad saying something on the phone a few weeks ago. He was laughing, saying something about how proactive Mom was. He said while he was at the house for the painter, Mom had him run out to the hardware store to get a copy of the key made for their emergency ring. He thought it was a brilliant idea. There it was, the confirmation. The final, damning piece of the puzzle. It wasn't just a simple overstep. It was a conspiracy. A premeditated, calculated deception designed by my mother and executed by my father. They had used my trust, my gratitude for their help, as an opportunity to undermine the very independence I was trying to build. The betrayal was so much deeper than I had imagined. It wasn't just about them being in my house. It was about the lie they had built to get there. "Thanks, Ben," I said, my voice dangerously hollow. "That's all I needed to know. What are you going to do?" he asked, a note of genuine concern in his voice. For the first time, I think he truly understood that the distance he had put between himself and our parents wasn't just for convenience, it was for survival. A cold, clear resolve washed over me, crystallizing my anger into a solid plan. "I'm changing the locks," I said, "and then I'm changing the rules." The next afternoon, the locksmith arrived. He was a friendly, middle-aged man with kind eyes and calloused hands, and he seemed to sense my urgency without needing an explanation. Watching him dismantle the old locks on my front and back doors was incredibly cathartic. With each turn of his screwdriver, I felt like a layer of my parents' influence was being stripped away from my home. I had chosen the new hardware carefully. On the back door and the garage access door, I opted for heavy-duty, pick-resistant deadbolts. For the front door, I invested in a smart lock with a keypad. It was sleek, modern, and most importantly, keyless for daily use. It represented a new era of access, one that I and I alone would control. As the locksmith installed it, he showed me how to set the master code and create temporary codes for guests, codes that could be deleted at any time. The symbolism was not lost on me. When he was finished, he handed me a small box containing 2 new physical keys. "Just for emergencies," he said with a smile. "Guard them well." "Oh, I will," I replied, my voice filled with a conviction that probably sounded strange to him. I clutched the small, sharp pieces of metal in my hand. They felt like symbols of my reclaimed independence. As soon as the locksmith drove away, I took one key and placed it in my jewelry box, buried beneath old necklaces. The other, I put on a string and hung around the neck of a dusty bottle of wine Chloe had given me, which I then tucked away in the deepest corner of my pantry. No one was getting their hands on these keys. But changing the physical locks was only the first step. The more difficult part was changing the invisible ones, the unspoken rules and expectations that had governed my relationship with my parents for 29 years. This was where Chloe's expertise became invaluable. That evening, she came over with a laptop and a determined look on her face. "All right," she said, setting up at my kitchen table. "Let's draft your Declaration of Independence." In HR, when we have to deal with a problematic employee, we don't just have a vague chat. We create a performance improvement plan. It has clear, documented expectations and consequences. That's what we need to do for Alina and David. It sounded cold and corporate, but it was exactly the kind of structured, impersonal approach I needed to detach from the emotional turmoil. For the next hour, we outlined what I called my personal boundary policies. It was a simple, one-page document with a handful of bullet points. Visiting policy: All visits to my home must be scheduled in advance and confirmed by me. The home is not a public space. It is a private residence. Arrival protocol: unannounced visits are not permitted. If you arrive without a prior invitation, the door will not be opened. Please call or text first. Communication standards: all communications, whether by phone, text, or in person, will be conducted with mutual respect. Guilt-tripping, emotional manipulation, or demands will result in the immediate conclusion of the conversation. Household access: no spare keys to my home or property will be provided to anyone for any reason. In case of a verifiable emergency where I am unresponsive, Chloe is my designated emergency contact and has instructions. Reading the list, I felt a surge of empowerment. It was everything I had wanted to say for years, now codified into a clear, unambiguous set of rules. It left no room for interpretation or misconstruction, but there was one more piece of the puzzle I needed to address. My parents had given me a substantial sum of money to help with the down payment. At the time, I'd accepted it gratefully, seeing it as a gift. Now, I saw it for what it was in their eyes, an investment. It was the leverage they believed gave them the right to say my house was family property. They had purchased a controlling share in my life, and I needed to buy it back. The next day, I took a personal day off from work and went to my bank. I explained the situation to a loan officer, and we worked out the details for a personal loan that would allow me to pay back my parents' gift in its entirety. The interest rate was high, and the monthly payment would make my budget tight again for the next few years, but it was a price I was more than willing to pay for my freedom. My final stop was a small legal office Chloe had recommended. I had a lawyer draft a formal loan agreement outlining the repayment of the original sum plus a standard rate of interest, backdated to the day they gave me the money. I wanted this to be clean, official, and undeniable. It wasn't a gift I was returning, it was a debt I was settling. That evening, I stood in my living room, the newly installed smart lock gleaming on the front door. In my hands, I held two documents: the single page outlining my new boundary policies and the official legal agreement to repay their money. The house was finally secure. Now I had to secure my life. I picked up my phone and sent a simple text message to both of my parents. "We need to have a house discussion. Please come over tomorrow at 6 p.m. It's important." My mother replied almost instantly, "Of course, dear. Should I bring dinner?" I took a deep breath and typed my response. "No, just bring yourselves." The plan was in motion. There was no turning back now. They arrived at precisely 6:00 p.m. the next evening. I watched them pull up from my living room window, a familiar sense of dread coiling in my stomach. I had to force it down, replacing it with the cold resolve I had been cultivating for the past 2 days. This was not a family dinner. This was a business meeting, and I was in charge. I opened the front door before they had a chance to ring the bell. I had dressed intentionally in a crisp blazer and dark jeans, an outfit that felt more like armor than clothing. I did not smile. "Come in," I said, my tone neutral. I stepped back to let them pass but did not move further into the house. I remained standing in the entryway, creating a subtle but clear barrier. This was not a space they were being welcomed into. It was a space they were being permitted to enter, temporarily. They looked uncertain. My mother, Alina, was holding a bakery box which she tried to press into my hands. "I know you said not to bring anything, but I couldn't resist. It's that apple pie you like." "Thank you for the thought, but please take it with you when you leave," I said, not taking the box. "We have business to discuss. It won't take long." Her face tightened. My father, David, cleared his throat, ever the one to try and smooth over a tense moment. "Everything okay, sweetie?" "Your text sounded so serious." "It is serious," I replied, gesturing to the small entryway table where I had placed the documents. "That's why I asked you here. I've made some permanent changes regarding this house and our relationship that I need to make you aware of." I let them read the first document, the one titled Personal Boundary Policies. I watched their faces as their eyes scanned the bullet points. My father's expression shifted from confusion to deep discomfort. My mother's face, however, went through a more dramatic transformation. It went from curiosity to disbelief, then to outright fury. A dark, angry flush spread across her cheeks. "What is this?" she demanded, slapping the paper down on the table. "Is this a joke? Arrival protocol. Communication standards. We're your parents, Natalie, not your employees. Then I suggest you stop treating my home like an office you have a master key to," I replied, my voice remaining level and calm. Her eyes widened at the directness of my response. She looked at my father for support, but he was staring at the floor, looking deeply ashamed. "I have also changed all the locks on the house," I continued, pressing my advantage. "The key you had made no longer works. There will be no more spare keys. My security and my privacy are no longer up for negotiation." "This is unbelievable," Elinor seethed, her voice a low, furious hiss. "After everything we've done for you, we helped you buy this house. You would never have been able to afford it without us. And this is the thanks we get? You treat us like criminals." This was the moment I had been waiting for, the moment she brought up the money. "I agree," I said smoothly. "The financial ties between us have created a misunderstanding about ownership and access, and I'm here tonight to correct that misunderstanding." I picked up the second document, the formal loan agreement and a bank-certified cashier's check. I slid them across the table towards them. "This is a legal document formalizing the money you gave me for the down payment as a loan, which I am now beginning to repay. And this," I said, tapping the check, "is the first installment. It includes retroactive interest. I will continue to make payments on the first of every month until the debt is settled in full." The silence that followed was absolute. This was something they had not anticipated. They had expected tears, arguments, maybe a grudging apology from me. They had not expected a legal document and a check. I had taken their greatest weapon, their financial generosity, and neutralized it with cold, hard cash. My mother stared at the check as if it were a snake. The idea that I was paying her back, that I was refusing to be indebted to her, was a fundamental rejection of her power. It was a rejection she couldn't comprehend. "I don't want your money," she finally managed to say, her voice choked with emotion. "I want my daughter." "You have my daughter," I replied, my voice softening just a fraction, but my resolve unshaken. "But this house, my life, my decisions, those are mine. You can have a relationship with the adult I have become, or you can have nothing. But the days of you being the managers of my life are over." I had said everything I needed to say. The foundation of our old relationship had been demolished. Now it was up to them to decide if they wanted to help me build a new one. I walked to the front door and opened it. "These are the new terms," I said, looking them both in the eye. "The eviction from your roles as my landlords is effective immediately. You can decide if you want to accept the new role of invited guests. Please let me know your decision another time." They were utterly defeated. My father took the papers from the table, his movements slow and heavy. My mother wouldn't even look at me. They walked out the door without another word. I closed it gently behind them, and for the second time in 3 days, I slid the deadbolt home. This time, it didn't feel like a defense. It felt like a declaration. The days that followed the confrontation were some of the strangest of my life. The silence from my parents was deafening. There were no angry phone calls, no guilt-ridden text messages, no dramatic voicemails. There was just nothing. It was the first time in my 29 years that an entire week had gone by without some form of contact from them, and the void they left was both terrifying and liberating. A part of me, the part conditioned since childhood to seek their approval, felt a gnawing guilt. I replayed the conversation over and over in my head, wondering if I had been too harsh, too cold. I felt like an orphan of my own making. But another, stronger part of me felt an intoxicating sense of peace. When my phone didn't ring, I didn't have to brace myself for an interrogation about my weekend plans. When I came home from work, I knew with absolute certainty that the only person inside would be me. The house began to feel like a sanctuary again, but this time, the feeling was deeper, more authentic. I had earned this peace. I had fought for it. I discussed the swirling mess of emotions with Chloe over coffee. She listened patiently as I talked about the guilt and the relief, the anxiety and the freedom. "What you're feeling is completely normal," she said, stirring her latte. "You've basically rewritten the entire constitution of your family. There's going to be a period of upheaval before the new government can take hold. But you can't back down now. You hold the line." Her words were a lifeline. She was right. Any retreat on my part, any apologetic phone call to smooth things over, would signal to them that the new rules were negotiable. And they weren't. A few days later, I received a call from my brother, Ben. "So," he said, his voice hesitant, "I heard there was an incident." I braced myself, expecting him to tell me I needed to make amends. "Mom and Dad called me," he continued. "They gave me their version, of course. Said you dethroned them out, served them with legal papers, and were being incredibly cold and ungrateful." He paused. "And I have to say, Nat, I'm really proud of you." I was so shocked I couldn't speak for a moment. "You are?" "Yeah," he said, and I could hear a smile in his voice. "I've been letting them get away with their nonsense for years because it was easier than fighting. I just moved away. But you stood your ground, you drew a line in the sand. Frankly, it's inspiring. You've made me realize I need to set some clearer boundaries myself." His validation was like a balm on my frayed nerves. Knowing that he understood, that he saw what I did as strength and not cruelty, meant the world to me. We talked for almost an hour, more candidly than we had in years, about the subtle and not-so-subtle ways our parents' need for control had shaped our lives. It felt like, in standing up to them, I had inadvertently started to build a stronger, more honest relationship with my brother. About 2 weeks after the confrontation, a letter arrived. It was a single envelope with my father's familiar, neat handwriting on the front. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper and the check I had given them, which had not been cashed. The letter was short and to the point. "Natalie, you were right. I am sorry. I broke your trust, and I allowed your mother to convince me it was for the right reasons. It was disrespectful. Your house is your house. I hope that, in time, you can forgive me. Your mother is still processing things in her own way. As for the money, please consider it a gift as it was always intended. No strings attached this time. I promise. Love, Dad." I read the letter 3 times, the words blurring through a film of tears. It wasn't a perfect apology, and the line about my mother processing things was a classic bit of paternal understatement, but it was more than I had ever expected. It was an acknowledgement. It was the first brick in a new foundation. I didn't respond right away. I let his words settle. A few weeks later, I sent him a simple text. "Thank you for the letter. Maybe we could get coffee sometime. Just us." He agreed immediately. Our relationship is different now. It's quieter, more cautious, but it's also more honest. We meet for coffee every few weeks. He asks about my life, and he listens to my answers without offering unsolicited advice. He is learning to be the father of an adult daughter, not the manager of a child. My mother remains a more complicated story. She eventually started sending short, stilted text messages, mostly asking about the weather or my car's maintenance schedule. It is her way of reaching out without admitting fault. I respond politely but keep a respectful distance. She has not been back to my house. Perhaps one day she will be, but it will be on my terms, with an invitation she has waited for. Months have passed. I am sitting in my living room on a quiet Sunday afternoon, the sunlight streaming through the windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. The house is peaceful. It is a true and profound quiet, not the tense silence of conflict, but the gentle hum of contentment. I look at my front door, at the sleek, dark metal of the smart lock. I feel no anxiety, no fear of an unexpected turn of the knob. I feel only a deep, abiding sense of security. I am home. Not just in these 4 walls, but within myself. I am the sole keyholder to my own life, and the quiet is the sound of true ownership.